Well, thank you very much, Brian, and good morning, everybody. This is a great space. I'd say beautiful, but the beauty is probably somewhat in the past and yet to be in the future. But it's a very striking space. Really pleased to be here. I've had a long connection with Brooklyn through its parks, and more recently been very inspired by the work of the Gowanus Canal Conservancy and the vision inherent in something like looking at the Gowanus Canal, taking something that's so polluted and has been so derelict for so long and saying this can be great again. I find very inspirational. I'm going to talk. We're going to have a lot of fun. I hope. I'm going to show you some fun images. It's a bit of a Baedeker, it's a sort of tour around sort of park development themes, but also the reactivation of abandoned infrastructure, or the changing of natural infrastructure to transportation infrastructure, and from transportation infrastructure to recreational infrastructure, and all these sort of related themes. And really the title of this talk should have been Rivers, Roads, Rails, and Canals, because I'm going to focus a lot on canals, and how this sort of derelict industrial and post-industrial landscape can become useful recreational landscape. Anybody, by the way, as children yourself, or if you have children, know the game, the little sort of German card game, Rivers, Roads, and Rails? This is a very cool game made by Ravensburger, where you have different cards that illustrate railroad tracks and roads and rivers, and you have to sort of make them match up. I think it's developed or part of a conspiracy to turn children into urbanists and urban planners and landscape architects. So speaking of canals, the mother of all canal cities, everybody knows where this is, right? Or just shout it out if you know where this is. Amsterdam, yes. So talk about engineering. Working with water and manipulating water is something that goes back centuries and centuries, through all the continents. But the one most closely related to where we are here today is Amsterdam. And Amsterdam was this remarkable feat of engineering of building up from the swamps and draining, and these things called polders, and using wind power to drain swamps, and then building a network of canals. And if you've been to Amsterdam, to this day, it's an extraordinary city, and an inspiration, for the rest of the world about how you live in a country that's largely speaking below sea level. But keep this image of Amsterdam in your mind. And somebody, I think Brian said, I said, I'm going to show a lot of really cool maps. He said, well, this is perfect for this crowd. You've got a crowd of techno geeks. So if you're like me, we could just leave this map up on the screen for the next hour and stare at it. There's so much in these maps. But of course, from Amsterdam, you go to New Amsterdam. And I love this. This is my favorite map ever. Showing New Amsterdam approximately 1660, which was 4 years before the end meaning the end of the Dutch influence, not the influence, but the Dutch actual legal ownership of New Amsterdam, because in 1664 the English came and turned New Amsterdam into New York. But I love looking at this map because you can see on the left the wall of Wall Street, so clearly demarcated, and sort of that neat little Dutch civilization inside it, and just the big green areas outside of it. And then you see these fantastic gardens and orchards just inside that. And you can almost see the progression from crowded downtown urban to suburban at the edge of the wall. But more interestingly, you can see a canal running up from the East River going in there. So the Dutch are busy completely remaking the waterfront for one purpose. What was that purpose? What were the Dutch using the waterfront for? Was it for recreation? Business, commerce, yeah. Everything was about business. The Dutch came here to do business. And they immediately started filling in and carving out and building slips and wharfs and bulkheads. And that defined New York City for the rest of our history. So people talk about we need to take back the waterfront to the way it used to be. No. The waterfront, when the Europeans came here, was used for commerce, and it was used for commerce really for the next 350 years. And it wasn't until then that people started saying, hey, we need to get to the waterfront to see it too, and not just dump stuff in and do business on. But I love this map. And then a slightly later map. This is probably made in the 18th century, but is representing New York in approximately 1740. You can sort of make out that dog leg line midway through. That's probably the canal of Canal Street, which didn't last very long. By 1811, it had already been filled in. So it's the first big canal in New York, and the eponymous Canal Street. And you can see the Collect Pond and a few other things. But by now, New York is growing a lot. But waterborne commerce is still the very dominant thing that defines the New York edge. It wasn't just in New York. In England, I love this image. It's a canal going across an aqueduct over a river. So if you look closely, you can see there's a barge being pulled on this bridge and the aqueduct across it. So you see this multimodal transit node, and this is from the 1760s. So in the 1760s, a very early industrial era canal, but it's just so cool the way you have these oxen or horses pulling this barge on a bridge. The bridge is full of water on top of other waterborne commerce below. And then of course the canal that defined the empire, that created New York. There's a lot of reasons why New York became the financial capital of the United States and the world, but mainly it was about waterborne commerce. And it didn't really fully exploit its position as a trading area by a great river and bay until the Erie Canal was built and completed by 1825. A 360-mile canal from Albany all the way to Buffalo, connecting to the Hudson River and allowing unfettered commerce, and New York at the hub of it. By the 1840s in America, there were more than 3,000 miles of engineered canals, and most of our commerce was moving because the roads were terrible. Of course, there were no trucks. There were no trains. So the only way that goods and services could move effectively and efficiently was by water, and often through canals. And right around the same time, a little bit earlier, you've probably all seen this on the bottom here on the left, is the Gowanus Creek in its pre-canal age. And I can also stare at this map forever, looking at how many beautiful natural wetlands there were in Brooklyn that have been exterminated. And then if you look at the fine print there, it says Brookland Ferry. And I've seen many different variations of the name Brooklyn, and including the Dutch Broekelen and stuff. But this is Brookland, as in a land of brooks. So it makes me wonder, is this just somebody's idea of the name of Brooklyn? But it's Brookland, and that's one I've never seen before, and I kind of like that because it's a land of brooks, including this great Gowanus stream. And then, of course, by the 1840s, again, commerce is dominating, and they're saying this fetid swamp full of mosquito, and we can't make money. We need to turn this into something that makes money. And so, commerce. Daniel Richards, who's a local merchant, wants to turn this creek into an avenue for business. But it's not until the 1860s that the state legislature puts in the money, and a U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Major David Douglas, as in, I think, Douglas Street here, is in charge of digging and excavating and creating the Gowanus Canal. And here you can see some great early images of the canal doing what the canal was meant to do, enable business and commerce. And then, like a lot of the other early infrastructure, it falls upon hard times. A lot of the commerce goes away. Waterborne commerce, in particular in New York, goes away, though it remains. When all the big shipping leaves the Hudson and East River, it stays on a smaller scale in this canal. So you have the former industrial uses, the current industrial uses, and then this sense of abandonment and abandoned infrastructure. So this theme of abandoned infrastructure will keep coming up again and again as I talk to you. Speaking of abandoned infrastructure, recreational infrastructure, I was going to show a bunch of pictures about the development of the New York City park system, but that's not really the thrust of my talk here. Rather, I'm fast forwarding to the 1970s and 1980s. And a previously magnificent park system developed in the 19th century, largely designed by Frederick Law Olmsted and Calvert Vaux, and then expanded dramatically in the 20th century under Robert Moses and his great architects and landscape architects by the 1970s has been effectively abandoned. So this recreational infrastructure, the thousands of acres of parks, the playgrounds, the waterfront parks, even the great Central Park, the swimming pools, they've been abandoned by our government. And it was a terrible time, a time when people were leaving New York in droves, the population was going down, and for some of the younger people in this room, if I tell you that Prospect Park and Central Park were really sort of scary places, largely abandoned, full of graffiti, abandoned and burnt down buildings, the lawns are all dust bowls, that was the park system of New York and the park system that I first got to know. And this was Central Park. For those of you who know Central Park, this is the Harlem Mere, the lake up at the north end, 110th Street, a 1930s era boathouse that had been turned into a restaurant, has been burned down by the restaurant operator to collect the insurance, and it sits there, a burnt out building at the north end of Central Park, and the lake is half empty and full of garbage, and that's the Central Park I sort of knew as a teenager. But then this concept is brought alive. Gordon Davis is the Parks Commissioner, Ed Koch is the mayor, there's new hope for the city, there's money starting to flow back into the public parks. And a woman named Betsy Barlow becomes the Central Park administrator. She says, let's apply the idea of leading citizens helping this park the same way they would a concert hall or a hospital or a university. And the Central Park Conservancy is born around 1981. And this is a partnership between the nonprofit Central Park Conservancy and the city of New York, all personified by the Central Park administrator, and they come up with a master plan for rebuilding the park. And this is what Central Park looked like in the 1970s. This is where I used to play touch football on the sheep meadow. So that's the sheep meadow, circa 1970s. That's where you had your big events. You played softball and touch football and stuff. And the city has no capability for doing even basic maintenance. And it's all they can do to pick up the garbage, which they don't do very well. But in 1979, in addition to this new commissioner doing a lot of really cool things and hiring park administrators like Betsy Barlow and Tupper Thomas, they start a park ranger program to sort of help people enjoy parks, but also sort of reestablish this idea that somebody's in charge. And that park ranger pointing out where the nearest bathroom is, which is probably closed and locked and derelict, is me. That's me as a park ranger just out of college. That's true, it's not a joke. That's my partner, also named Adrian. And we're sort of, we're thrust out there by Gordon Davis saying, go out there and be grown-up Boy Scouts, and it was pretty funny being a park ranger. And one of my first jobs that fall was to be sort of security for the brand new sheep meadow. And this sheep meadow was this incredible thing. When they put new sod on the sheep meadow, they said, you're going to have to stand out there and explain to New Yorkers why they can no longer play touch football here. That was an interesting job. But, we learned diplomacy, and we said, this is going to be a passive use lawn where you won't be able to play soccer or football, and you can't have your dog, and it'll be the one nice piece of green grass that kids can crawl on. And this was a very important moment in New York's history to sort of say, we're going to have one nice thing. And then that one nice thing became two nice things and so on. And the Central Park Conservancy gave birth to a bunch of other similar organizations, both large and small. And this is just a smattering of them. They're not all up here. These are some of the several dozen sort of major conservancies, and then lots and lots, hundreds and hundreds of friends of groups and stuff like that. And what's important about these groups is not that they raise money, and some of them raise a lot of money, and some raise just a little bit of money. What's most important about them is the active civic engagement that happens with a conservancy, that citizens are involved with the life of a public park. And administrations come and go, budgets come and go, priorities come and go, but citizens are constant, and they provide this continuity of involvement and engagement that hopefully, will not allow the park system to ever again go back to what it was in the 1970s. They'll hold government's feet to the fire and make sure that the parks stay great. And you can see that the Gowanus Canal Conservancy is one of many here in New York. And what about conservancies elsewhere? This model was copied. It started here in New York, like a lot of innovations in design and park management. It started in New York, goes national across the country. And here's a chart that my organization, the Trust for Public Land, did. We're doing a study now of conservancies. And this shows the annual spending and the spending per acre. and if you look at in the top 10, it's dominated by New York conservancies. But you go down to, there's conservancies all over in Buffalo and St. Louis and San Jose and so on. And they're all busy engaging in these sort of interesting, cool public-private partnerships. So for example, Piedmont Park in Atlanta, a beautiful park, the Central Park of Atlanta, but like many inner city parks, abandoned. You can see it's all overgrown there with kudzu. The swimming pool is abandoned and closed down. Half of the park is being used as a parking lot. And take a good look at these pictures, because that's before, and these exact same places after. The swimming pool restored, the cars taken out, the gazebos restored. Almost $80 million raised by the citizens of Atlanta to restore and have a great new Central Park of Atlanta again. Same thing in Houston, and these are all before and after pictures in Herman Park. All, again, starting roughly in the early 1990s. So this idea of citizen engagement in parks and doing conservancies is not at all limited to New York, though it's sort of played out at a larger scale and with so many more organizations in New York than in other cities, but that makes sense because we're much bigger than most other cities and have more parks. The transformation of either abandoned or unnecessary or poorly serving infrastructure happens at a very massive scale in Chicago, not in terms of the size, but the impact. So this is the site of Millennium Park in Chicago. Downtown Chicago, there's a big subgrade parking lot, there's a rail yard, train station, and the original idea for this site is to just cover it over with another parking lot. Well, Mayor Daley at the time says, I have a better idea. What if we cover this over with a great park and convening center and a place for music and performances? So Millennium Park happens, and this before and after is so striking. It's not just that this 30-acre park was created and it has spectacular architecture and public art and gathering places, but it takes a sort of negative space, turns into positive space, and has a huge impact on the downtown population, on development, on investment. So the transformation of abandoned or poorly working civic spaces into parks has a huge economic impact and makes space, most important, it makes the cities more livable, more desirable, and as they create magnets for tourism, but they do have this economic development portion. Another interesting way as you get into these cities, particularly growing cities, there isn't a lot of room to make parks. So what do? You take the terrible things that happened to cities in the 50s and 60s where they ripped interstate highways right through the hearts of the cities. This is Dallas, Texas. And the Woodall-Rogers Freeway in the circle there, you can see the freeway in a trench coursing through Dallas, Texas. And they come up with an idea for a public-private partnership to put a park over it. And they put this park on a deck so that in the big image you can see the park on the deck covering over this 8 or 10 lane freeway through the heart of Dallas, connecting a residential neighborhood with the arts district. $110 million, of which about half was raised privately and half, amazingly, raised through federal transportation funds, through local state Department of Transportation funds, and other city funds. And now you have a spectacular park and performance space and gathering space in Dallas, Texas. And this idea of covering freeway trenches in cities is actually happening in a bunch of cities. It's happening in Denver. It happened long ago in Seattle. A number of cities are looking to do this. It's expensive, but a lot less expensive than trying to acquire land in growing cities. We have a great opportunity to do that right here in Brooklyn. On top of our beautiful BQE, this is a plan by D-Land Studio to cover over the trench in Southside Williamsburg with a 4-acre park with a synthetic turf field on it and trees on the other side and stormwater capture. So this idea, again, of taking bad, underperforming spaces and making them into good spaces is something I call urban alchemy. And the Brooklyn Borough President and the Congresswoman and all the elected officials have endorsed this. It's just a matter of finding, $50 or $100 million. Very simple. Right, Councilman? Yes, so, well, that's even more expensive. That's $1 billion. So, cities are cities in nearby suburbs are where 83% of Americans live. and that's growing. So these are the major urban counties and population centers, and cities are becoming much more important. We all understand how they work environmentally and how they are more sustainable and more environmentally appropriate places for people to live. It's not by accident that the Trust for Public Land works in many of those cities, so just a little word from not our sponsor, but my sponsor. These are a map of some of the cities where the Trust for Public Land is working around the country. Not just here in New York, but in Newark, New Jersey. We are the primary builder of parks for the city of Newark because their parks department doesn't have a design and construction division. So we work in partnership with the city of Newark to build parks and playgrounds. So we work in really big cities, medium-sized cities, very sort of hardcore urban areas, and even cities like Bozeman, Montana, where we've acquired the land and are designing the equivalent of the Central Park of Bozeman, this thing called Story Mill. And the other thing we do is we do a lot of analysis, GIS, so for all you techno geeks, GIS is an incredibly important tool. And we do something called Park Score. And Park Score is a way of ranking cities as to how well they provide parks. And we look at a bunch of categories, including, what's your percentage of parkland, and most important, how many people live within a 10-minute walk of a park. And on our Park Score maps, which you can find just by Googling Park Score or going to our website, everything that's in light green, so for example, this happens to be a map of this neighborhood, and all the light green areas are places where people are within a 10-minute walk of a park. We don't say whether there's a big park, or little park, good park, or bad park. It's just a park. So, in fact, New York City does very, very well. It's in the sort of top 3 in the nation. It's number 2 in the nation in terms of overall park score, but it's in the top 3 in terms of access to parks, and that's a very important consideration. Parks are also very important places for sustainable design. Not just that they should be designed sustainably, but because it's the right thing to do, but parks have this incredible ability to stack values and to perform what people refer to as ecosystem services. And my colleague from the Trust for Public Land, a former Parks Department colleague, Nettie Compton, who's sitting in the back there, was one of the co-authors of this really important piece of work, which you can get for free online, about how to design sustainable parks. Focused on New York, but really applicable to almost any urban setting. And it was part of a really sort of laser-like focus on sustainability by Michael Bloomberg when he was mayor, and all of the people working there, and it was really a lot of fun to work on this report. And so when you look at crowded cities like New York, it's really about recycling landscapes. There isn't so-called virgin land out there to make parks in New York. There hasn't been probably for more than a century, except for portions of Queens and Staten Island. So that's where something like the High Line happens. You take this old, abandoned, this is what the High Line looked like shortly after the train stopped running on it. You no longer had factories and warehouses in downtown Manhattan, and this was going to be torn down. And you've all heard this story, so I won't go through it, but the neighborhood works to save it. It becomes this, not just this really vital piece of open landscape for a very, very crowded, dense community that has no parks, but also a magnet for economic development, and now a worldwide tourist attraction. And every city is seeking to have its own High Line. And once again, New York is sort of a design avatar. But this idea of repurposing abandoned railroad infrastructure is not at all isolated here to New York. It's all over the country. There are 20,000 miles of rail trails across the country. My group, the Trust for Public Land, is involved in many of them. And here's a small city in Maine, well, big for Maine, small by New York standards, city of Portland, where a number of miles of, again, abandoned railroad track are being converted, or have been converted, into what's now the Bayside Trail, which connects with another trail. And Portland happens to be one of the, anybody been to Portland? Such a cool city. Great bicycling, great access, and incredibly, like the best restaurant city in America, pretty much. I mean, we'd like to think we're a great restaurant city. Like, there are more restaurants per capita in Portland, way more than in restaurants in New York. And here's the community getting involved with creating this Bayside Trail, and this concept of the transformation, again, of abandoned infrastructure into useful railroad trails, or even railroad yards. When the rail yard closes, it can become condos or it can become a park. And we worked with landscape architect Ken Smith designed this park on land that we acquired in Santa Fe and created an award-winning park called Rail Yard Park. So the rails, the yards, the bridges, the brownfields, all of these things have potential for new life when you think about them, such as in Atlanta. Atlanta is a city with a lot of sprawl and not a lot of good bicycling and sort of linear recreational parks. And a guy named Ryan Gravel, who Nettie was just with in Austin, Texas, in his master's thesis, was it at Georgia Tech? Yeah, Georgia Tech, he wrote a master's thesis about this idea of taking all of these abandoned rail lines and creating a linear park with mass transit on portions of it, but mostly with a bicycle path. And I think that's Ryan walking along what would become later the Atlanta Beltline, these abandoned rail lines doing the circumference around Atlanta. And this is what it looked like before and what it looks like today. And these rail trails can be found all over. And they're always a little bit controversial when you propose them, because God forbid somebody's on a bicycle in your backyard. So people were living near these abandoned rail lines and got used to having these abandoned rail lines, and then suddenly there's people on bicycles behind them, and nothing's worse than a person on a bicycle. Chicago, same thing. Chicago is the second city, but not second in parks. It's a great park city. And stop me if you've heard this before. Former abandoned elevated freight rail line running through residential district, known as the Bloomingdale Trail, now being converted into a 3-mile linear park. And this is Trust for Public Land project. It's a $100 million project, and we're on the hook for raising about half the money. But we hired a local landscape architect that is local to Brooklyn, Michael Van Valkenburg Associates. And here's what the Bloomingdale Trail looks like more or less today, cutting right behind people's homes through north central Chicago. And then what it will look like when it's transformed into a park. And it's under construction as we speak. It's going to open next year. So this project is happening. It's so cool. Here again, current conditions are current as of a couple of years ago, and as transformed by Michael Van Valkenburg Associates. And they just do a beautiful job. Of course, the landscape architects behind Brooklyn Bridge Park. Now, there's another great opportunity to do a rail trail conversion here in New York in a linear park. And has anybody here heard about the Queensway project? Well, awesome. It's an educated audience. So this is a Trust for Public Land project, and we were approached by some people who lived in central Queens about this abandoned Long Island Railroad corridor, which runs for 3.5 miles from northern Queens down into Ozone Park. And here's a part of the plan, part of the conceptual plan that's being developed, showing the potential for this trail. It runs right through the middle of Forest Park, which is a big park in the middle of Queens, and has the potential for on-street bicycle connections to the Jamaica Bay Greenway and to Flushing Meadows Park, and would become the first major sort of bicycle and pedestrian trail in Queens. It's 47 acres, of which 40 acres are owned by the city through DCAS, and 7 acres run through Forest Park. And this is that image of the green on the left. That's what it actually looks like as it runs through Forest Park. Incredibly beautiful and bucolic. It's just hard to believe. And then on the right, yes, on the right, you can see images of what you find there now. It's abandoned. That image on the top is a soda bottle full of used needles. So it's not doing very much good right now as an abandoned rail line, but it could be great as a park. And these sections through it show the various topographies. So it starts out elevated on an earthen embankment, a stone-lined earthen embankment, and stays there, and it goes across bridges. Then it goes down a litit bit below grade as it goes through the ravine in Forest Park, and then comes up on top of a structure, very much like the High Line, as it gets down to the south end, South Ozone Park. And these plans, by the way, we hired a great design team that includes WXY and D-Land Studio, and a really good team of engineers and consultants. They've come up with a great conceptual plan, which is going to be released next week. And here is a rendering of what the north end could look like with a playground and wetland area, stormwater capture, again, maximizing the green infrastructure potential of something which right now is not doing very much in terms of ecosystem surveys. And speaking of green infrastructure, this lovely diagram of a flower, the center of which is green infrastructure, but all of these benefits that occur if you use green infrastructure in a park. And they're environmental benefits and aesthetic benefits, public health benefits, economic benefits. So you start to stack up all of these layers in a park, and suddenly that park, which is a few $1 million or even $100 million, it seems very inexpensive because all of these values spring from it. And speaking of green infrastructure, the Trust for Public Land a number of years ago pioneered this idea of turning the sort of classic old New York City schoolyard, which is basically a sheet of asphalt, into a really full-purpose playground that gets used after school by the neighborhood. That was a revolutionary concept, and we were doing it one at a time, and then under Mayor Bloomberg, it really took off under Plan YC, and 250 schoolyards were transformed into playgrounds. Then the money ran out, but our wise New York director said, there's money in green infrastructure funding from DEP, and so we started doing a public education campaign. We borrowed the Center for Urban Pedagogy's wonderful Sewer in a Suitcase, and this became our chief sort of propaganda tool, going out to these schools and working with the students, the community, and helping them to understand all of the glories of a combined sewer system and what CSOs are and why green infrastructure is important. And so this educational campaign led to getting funding from DEP and from local elected officials and from Department of Education in some cases. And so you can take right here in the Gowanus watershed, sewer shed, PS 261, and this is PS 261 as it appeared just a short time ago. This is huge, 1 acre of asphalt. Where's all that rainwater going on this rainy day? Sloping, sheet draining off the site and into a storm sewer and causing a combined sewer overflow or contributing to it, causing us to be in violation of the Clean Water Act and all of these other terrible things, dirtying the waters. So you can take this playground and transform it into that. So this is the before, after, how it looks today. The synthetic turf field there is actually a big sponge soaking up water, and permeable pavers and trees, and here's sort of a section showing the synthetic turf field with the gravel beneath it, which is where the water seeps into the ground instead of going into a storm sewer. And then you do have some pipes for the overflow, and then a rain garden in the corner, and again you see a bit of the underground technology where the rain garden fills up with water first, and then when it overflows, it'll go into the storm sewer. So you have to have these fallbacks. But this green infrastructure can happen everywhere, and I was very happy to see when Mayor de Blasio announced his new community park initiative. There's $36 million coming from DEP to do green infrastructure in every single one of those neighborhood playgrounds that he's planning to revitalize. So green infrastructure has now become the coin of the realm. It's happening every place and really needs to happen every place. In Philadelphia, similar story, and you can see this in city after city across the country. These are the urban schoolyards, these terrible, big, impervious, low albedo, poorly functioning, awful quasi-public spaces. This is the William Dix Elementary School in North Philadelphia, and we came in there and we did the transformation. This is what it looks like today, that along the side there where you see the green, that's capturing all the stormwater runoff from an adjacent parking lot. So we're getting not only all the water from these 4 acres of asphalt to go into the ground, but also capturing it from the surrounding neighborhood. And now kids can play, this is like the Heisman Trophy pose. Kids can play football in a synthetic turf field instead of getting hurt on asphalt, and meanwhile it's performing this environmental function. In Los Angeles, anybody here from LA or been to LA? So as you know then, there are 800 miles of alleys in Los Angeles, these public alleys that are really not treated very well by the public. This is sort of a typical condition, and they're used mainly for car chases and cop movies. But this is what they look like. Again, different story in LA. They don't have the CSO problem that we have here because they just don't have a whole lot of rain. But they're also busy dumping what little rain they get into canals and sewers and concrete-lined rivers instead of capturing it in the ground where it really needs to be recharged into the water table. So we're working on a plan there to green the alleys, to make them community assets, to make them corridors for walking and for bicycling, and making them high albedo and having them be permeable, capturing stormwater, and become attractive assets for the neighborhood instead of unattractive drawbacks. Here you can see some details. The high albedo color concrete pavers, some details of the drainage for capturing the stormwater runoff and other elements. And this is happening as we speak in Los Angeles. So it's all about looking at these really poorly functioning areas. We're working in Cleveland. Cleveland, another big old industrial city with a big CSO problem. And they have green infrastructure funding from their sewer district. And we're looking at a bunch of areas where we can take private property that has been abandoned effectively and now belongs to the public and turn that into, again, green infrastructure with a public purpose. So we're working in Cleveland and in Milwaukee, where there's a 70-block long central corridor subject to terrible flooding, where we're now looking at taking some of these big impervious sheets of old parking and abandoned areas and turning it into a green asset. And then the sort of the final frontier in most cities is the waterfront. Again, going back in history 350 years, the Dutch set up the waterfront for commerce. It's used for commerce until the mid-20th century, and then it gets abandoned. And this is what Dumbo waterfront looked like not too long ago, before Brooklyn Bridge Park was built. So there's the Dumbo waterfront in 1987. There on the left image, you can see the Bronx River in its bad old days and what it looks like today. The Bronx River Restoration, an environmental justice group, starts in the 1970s and 1980s to clean up this terrible, the only freshwater river in New York that had become an open sewer, worse than the Gowanus in terms of what was being dumped into it. And this environmental justice community starts to build and becomes the Bronx River Alliance, and now you have a series of beautiful parks and greenways along the Bronx River, and $100 million, mostly public, invested in turning the Bronx River from an open sewer into a great green corridor. And then, of course, you add on this other overlay, the post-Sandy overlay, about our waterfront, so beautiful, so many potentials, and so susceptible to flooding and storm surge. And there again, you look at this ability to stack benefits. You say, okay, we need to build barriers to storm surge, but the barriers can be multi-purpose. There shouldn't just be some big ugly wall that walls us in. It should be a park when it's not being flooded, but it also should be able to be flooded, and it can be sort of a constructed park along a formal waterfront, or it can be a more naturalistic barrier. Now, here's a constructed park, Brooklyn Bridge Park. I refer to Brooklyn Bridge Park, Michael Van Valkenburg's great work of landscape architecture, as the ultimate recycled park, because of course those artificial hills are filled with stone that was dug up from building the railroad access tunnels to Grand Central for the East Side Tunnel activation. And the wood is recycled, and the stone is recycled, and even the water gets recycled in Brooklyn Bridge Park. So this is a park that's really built according to sustainable principles, and it sustained itself during Hurricane Sandy because the plantings were so well thought through that they'd have to tolerate inundation by salt water. And that's what we have to think about as we build our landscape. So there's a great Pier 1 with a huge crowd and the reactivation of the abandoned commercial waterfront. But it's not just these big constructed parks. It's also the natural parks. And this is Gerritsen Creek in South Brooklyn, where you had a really sort of butchered, like we butchered 85% of our natural wetlands. And here's the wetland in Gerritsen Creek before restoration and after restoration. 60 acres of restored wetland, and this creek probably played an important role. It didn't prevent flooding for the neighborhood. There was probably less flooding in the Marine Park neighborhood because of the Gerritsen Creek restored wetlands than in adjacent neighborhoods that only had seawalls. And particularly in the North Shore of Staten Island, the Old Place creeks, and there's a very extensive wetland system, and the one sort of coastal area of Staten Island that didn't flood dramatically was this area of very intact wetlands. So we don't know exactly how well wetlands do in terms of mitigation of storm surge, but we know that they're important. And we know that creating waterfront access in a place like Newark, where there was absolutely no access by people to the river, was important. So we worked to turn a brownfield next to a Superfund site into this beautiful new park. And I see the landscape architect for the park standing in the back. Welcome. So this is Newark Waterfront Park that the Trust for Public Land worked with the county and the city. And for the first time, the residents of Newark have access to the park. Tennessee, getting the Tennessee River activated with a waterfront pathway, the economic development potential of those things, and then using the need for green infrastructure in places like Atlanta and creating a very elegant park, which is really just a big stormwater capture system. Or, uncovering the old Tanner Spring in the Pearl District of Portland and recreating wetlands, and taking the historic bayous of Houston and using those as places to capture stormwater to be parks. And this is a concept that goes back as early as 1912. Or the creeks of Austin, Texas, where Nettie just came back from, Waller Creek, now being restored as a park and greenway with a very complex system of pumping water up from Ladybird Lake to keep the water flowing and also performing a flood prevention function. So all across the country, you're having this intersection of restoring the landscapes, of restoring the abandoned industrial infrastructure and creating parks, of using green infrastructure and creating ecosystem services in parks, and getting back to something very local, this concept of the Sponge Park done by D-Land Studio, which will go into construction finally, we hope, maybe even this fall. And just a small piece of the puzzle of restoring the Gowanus Canal, which of course is being restored because of the focus of the neighbors. So coming back full circle, the canals, citizen involvement, and there's almost nothing that can't be accomplished if citizens get behind it. And usually it's citizens taking the lead and then government follows. And I want to pay tribute to the people here of Gowanus, of this community, who've fought for many years, whether it's doing cleanups or coming up with plans or composting, and saying, this thing which has been suffered for so long can become a great asset. And this bucolic, the limpid pools of Gowanus, have a great future. So thank you very much. I don't know if, any questions? A couple of minutes? Yeah, so if anybody has any questions about anything that's happening anywhere, at any time, or everywhere. I mean, you're from all over the country. Yes? Okay, well, so a lot of what we're doing today, there's a lot of cross fertilization. So Amsterdam is particularly creative. A lot of Northern Europe has been particularly creative on the green infrastructure front, and then they even have a few more liberties when they reactivate sort of former factory sites and brownfields, because there's a little bit less hysteria about the fact that you might die if you touch this exposed soil. So the transformation of of refineries and coal works areas in Germany and elsewhere in Northern Europe has been going on for many years now. There is a park similar to the gasworks plant park in Seattle, which was a very, probably the first transformation of gasworks infrastructure into a park back in the 1970s, which then became an inspiration for a lot of similar work in Europe. So it crossed the Atlantic and has come back here. It was the inspiration for a concrete plant park. So there is in fact a gasworks park in Amsterdam. I don't know if that's exactly the name, but a lot of parkland transformation. Of course, in Amsterdam and throughout the Netherlands, they have a real, resilience, sustainability issue. And the original concept for hundreds of years is just keep building higher and higher dikes. They're understanding now that they can't completely wall out the water, so now they're trying to create landscapes that can take flooding when it's flood time, but then go when it's not flood time, have other functions. So they're even relocating farms to highland and having areas that deliberately flood. So there's a great deal of stuff happening, particularly in Northern Europe, along these same lines, these same themes of reactivating abandoned industrial landscapes. Question back? Part of the long-term vision is that most people have the Gowanus includes both I think that I find it actually attractive when there are parks. So the Bronx River has the same thing. There are, there's a big, similar to here, there's a big metal recycling plant right on the Bronx River, right next to Hunts Point Riverside Park. And part of the attraction to me is you can sit in this bucolic park and watch the cranes lifting up the scrap metal and putting it in the barges. And a lot of people would argue, and I agree, that you need both. You need to have the jobs, and frankly, better for us if we're moving stuff by water rather than by trucks through our neighborhoods. So I would argue that it's really important, even though some people may disagree, it's really important to keep that industry where it is. And if you happen to live next door to the recycling center, maybe you don't feel that way. But it's our detritus. It has to go someplace, and you can decide. You can say, well, it should go to somebody else's neighborhood, or it should go by trucks, not by barge. But I think you can have both.
Are there examples where the park operation is also some use for barges or for transportation?
Yeah, I think where you get that, where you see some of that is in Hudson River Park. So Hudson River Park has a combination of very active shipping. Major cruise liners come in and out of Hudson River Park, and they have to be supplied in trucks. There's a couple of sanitation facilities in Hudson River Park. There are all kinds of municipal things where trucks have to go in and out. So there is, in fact, a coexistence, and it's pretty good. So you have a long linear park, but there are these nodes of industrial or municipal services going on. And you can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Some stuff just has to be on the water. Or it doesn't have to be on the water. You can move it to your neighborhood, but better on the water than in the middle of your neighborhood. So like a tow pound or something. Would you rather not have it there? Sure. But where are you going to put it? This is New York. That's, I think, a perfect example of a park where you have industrial uses going on right in the middle of it, or commercial uses. Another example would be the North River Sewage Treatment Plant. A big, stinky sewage treatment plant, but has a really nice park on top of it and next to it. And they coexist, and we have to coexist. It's an interesting thing. We create a lot of waste in New York, and we can either sort of dump that waste in somebody else or somebody else's neighborhood, or just deal with it. We have to deal with it. There's an interesting debate now about the use of crumb rubber as an infill material for synthetic turf fields. Some people don't like it. It gets hot, it smells. But if it's not being recycled to use in synthetic turf fields, it's going to be in a pile of tires in West Virginia someplace, a mountain of tires that somebody will set on fire and it'll burn for 3 years. So I think we have to it's unpleasant, but we have to take responsibility for our waste stream and deal with it here and not foist it on somebody else as much as possible. Well, a wise man I used to work for said once, if you can't count it, it doesn't exist. So I think the most important metric is quantitative. And even as we speak, we have this couple of cool units at the Trust for Public Land. One is our Climate Smart Cities unit, and the other is our GIS unit. And they've come together, and they're doing exactly that right now. We've gotten some grants to develop metrics for ecosystem services. So, if you plant this many trees, if you create this much green space, how much carbon capture is going on, how much cooling is taking place, how much water storage is taking place. And so we're doing it, and then it's happening all over. So the United States Forest Service, for example, little known fact, has an urban field station here in New York. And they're doing a lot of really sort of cutting edge research about the role that trees play in the local environment, and how much water is being captured in green streets and in street tree bioswales, and how much pollution absorption, particulate matter. So there are scientists who are studying this. So I would say that in terms of ecosystem services, it's incredibly important to document the qualitative, first of all, and the savings and the environmental impact. But then there's really the intangible, which is the qualitative. There's a hugely important role that parks play providing beauty in our lives. And I would say that's sort of the ultimate So one of my ultimate sort of ends for a park, I sort of like if it's not beautiful and inspirational and restful, why bother? So you can build a very high-use, high-activity, high-impact park, but it still can be beautiful, or you can design something very bucolic and can be beautiful. And that's one of the things I like about what Michael van Valkenburg has done, is he said it's okay to be beautiful. In fact, it should be beautiful. And Lee, beauty, right? There's a landscape architect who's been saying things should be beautiful and teaching that things should be beautiful for many years. I would never underestimate the role of urban beauty. So as particularly here along the Gowanus, yes, you have to address the environmental issues, and you have to capture the stormwater runoff, and you have to dig up what's under there through the Superfund work. But at the end of the day, you want it to be as beautiful as possible. And I take issue with the people who say, don't make it beautiful because that will lead to gentrification. Everybody needs beauty. And I think it's okay to take the risk. Yes, make sure you have your affordable housing, make sure that public housing stays in place, but make sure that public housing is as beautiful and as green as possible. So the Gowanus houses should be full of trees and beauty. Council member.
Extend on that.
Yeah.
What you're seeing from around the country that we should be thoughtful about in the dynamic between public infrastructure and parks and private development. Most of what you focused on were places, you named one offhand, it can be condos or it can be a park.
Yeah.
So you look mostly at sort of public right-of-way and parks, and that's much more, it's hard, but it's straightforward. We have obviously around the one some public right-of-way, to be sure, the canal itself. Obviously, most of the area is privately owned land, and so we're in this classic wrestle with
Okay.
how do we think about the relationship between the infrastructure investments we want, the public design improvements, the public benefits, and private development. There's good reason to be anxious that it's hard to get right, and if you look at 4th Avenue, or if you look at a lot of what's happened in Greenpoint and Williamsburg, you think we don't yet have the structure that we need to guarantee the beauty and the benefit, the improvements, the infrastructure investments. And so, this set of like almost we don't want to tie those things to any development, and yet if we're going to be thoughtful about the area, we have to have some way of achieving it. And I just wonder if people around the country are, it'd be easier to say we don't have to worry about gentrification. We haven't seen the set of places where all you get is the development and not the public benefits that you might have focused on.
All right, so what's the expression? Fools rush in where angels fear to tread. So I'll try to, that's me, okay. Let me be a little foolish here. So first of all, this issue, the issue about development pressures, private versus public, it's only happening here in Gowanus. That's not true. It's happening everywhere you turn. This is a big issue. It's an issue in Seattle, it's an issue in Portland, it's a huge issue in San Francisco. The issue of equity and making sure that cities aren't only for the rich. Believe it or not, that issue is taking place in cities across the country. Some cities wish they had rich people wanting to live there, but cities like Seattle and Portland and San Francisco, huge development pressures. Many of them are envious of New York for one thing that New York has that most cities don't have, which is the waterfront zoning text. So this is probably the one crowd I ever speak to. I don't have to explain the what. Anybody not know what the waterfront zoning text is? All right, so a few people don't. I'll explain it. The people who are brave enough to admit they didn't know what it is. So a number of years ago, the City Planning Commission developed a set of rules for what happens on the waterfront. And among those was, if you have private property along the waterfront and you're going to change the zoning, say from the old purpose or manufacturing or whatever to residential, when you develop that property, you must provide public access along the waterfront at your own expense. And not only must you provide it, the City Planning Commission has come up with guidelines for what it needs to look like and minimum widths and stuff like that. So effectively, you're forcing developers, private property owners, if they want to develop their properties to a maximum threshold, to create really good public access waterfront parks and to pay for their ongoing maintenance, either by themselves or by paying the city to do that. So that's what's been happening in Greenpoint and Williamsburg, is that a number of really beautiful parks have been developed by some really good landscape architects, being paid for completely by developers and maintained at the developer's expense. And I would imagine that would have to happen here too, right? So you have to have that. So that's one thing. The other thing is more of the bully pulpit, which is once the developer of private property has satisfied the basic requirements of the waterfront zoning text or any other zoning requirements and has satisfied new requirements, say for affordable housing, then it's a matter of the developer saying, do I want to just do the bare minimum, or do I want to be a really good citizen? Do I want to make this a really, not make it as big as it has to be so it stays in scale, step it back away from the open spaces, allow sunlight, don't block the sunlight, create public amenities, be part of the community. And I think that's where the back and forth takes place. And so in fact, this is happening all over, but many cities are not as advanced as New York in terms of protecting the waterfront through a zoning text. If you go to Seattle, they're building a big new waterfront park, $400 million project. They're taking down an elevated freeway, building a new park, a new boulevard, but the waterfront is still walled off by private ownership. Every pier on the Seattle waterfront is privately owned. So you walk along, you can't really see the Puget Sound because it's behind fences and piers and commercial activity. So we're kind of spoiled in New York that most of our waterfront is publicly owned, and we've built Hudson River Park and Brooklyn Bridge Park, and so many cities are very jealous of that. So let's talk about Brooklyn Bridge Park for a second. There's a lot of controversy about the fact that there's some residential houses and hotels being built along the edge of the park, and people say you shouldn't build buildings in the park. And what we have to step back and remember is it was never a park. It was a site of commerce owned by the Port Authority, and the original plan was to fill the whole place up with condos. And the neighborhood said, hey, wait a second, we need parks. So the state of New York, the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey said, okay, we'll let you turn it into park. And the state of New York and city of New York said, not only will we let you turn it into park, we'll put $400 million of public money into developing this park, but one quid pro quo, it's going to cost a ton of money to maintain this park, and we're going to lose all this money we used to make from the site, or could have made from the site. So we need to have it be self-supporting. So we're going to set aside a few nodes along the edge in the smallest possible footprint, using the most valuable possible revenue producer, which is residential housing or hotels, to guarantee a certain flow of revenue for this park. And that was the deal. The deal always was to do that. So to sort of revisionist history to say, hey, stop putting the towers in the parks. It was always planned that way, and it wasn't a park to begin with. And this is what's making that park possible. So I'm very pleased to see Mayor de Blasio supporting that and saying that's the deal, and that's going to move forward. I'm even more pleased to see that they're able to do that and add some affordable housing to it. And yes, for the people who live nearby, having a tall building built there is a bummer, but it's providing a lot of public good. And the Brooklyn Bridge Park has been a spectacular success, and everybody in Brooklyn uses it. It's a incredibly diverse user base, and again, we get a little bit spoiled here. We say, it's not perfect, should be this, should be that. I travel around the country. People are so jealous of what we've done here in New York and continue to do. We still continue to be, as we have been since the 1860s, the trendsetter for park creation, park design, park management. So the public debate, really healthy, really important. But at a certain point, you got to put the pencils down and say, we've done the deal. This is not perfect for everybody. The developer gave, the community gave, but we're going to end up with this, people will be living there. It'll be, generating jobs and income and taxes for the city. We're going to have a really nice park. And, I may not love exactly how it happened, but the public goods are so great, and it's the best possible landscape that, it was worth it in the long run. That's it. Thank you.